Hello, I'm Judith Johnson, and this is Humans of Clinical Academia, a Manchester Catalys podcast. Every episode, we invite a leading clinical academic to share 5 images that reflect key moments in their lives and careers. We do this over a drink of their choice. We describe these images in the audio version of the podcast, but head over to our YouTube channel and our Instagram page if you want to see the images for yourself. My guest this week is Professor Frank Lee Bowling, Chair in Translational and Experimental Medicine. Frank's healthcare qualification is a Doctor of Podiatric Medicine, and he has since accrued several degrees, including 4 doctorates. He is currently a registered UK paediatric surgeon based at Manchester University NHS Foundation Trust. In his academic life, Frank has published over 250 peer-reviewed publications and 6 books. Frank has also travelled around the globe to deliver healthcare in disaster and poverty-stricken areas. It is for this work that Frank was awarded an MBE from the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office in 2023. Alongside his NHS and global health work, Frank also now holds visiting or adjunct chair professorships at 4 other European universities, including our own University of Manchester. Professor Frank Bowling, welcome to Humans of Clinical Academia. Today we are doing the podcast over a large cup of tea. You are the first person that we've invited who's chosen tea. Have you always been a tea drinker?
Yes, I don't really drink coffee very much, but I do drink copious amounts of tea. Many years ago I worked in a garage restoring classic cars and bikes, and I think from that era I think the kettle really never turned itself off.
I'd say tea is the quintessential British drink of choice. So it sounds like for you that's something that you've just kept up with and you haven't made the move over to coffee quite yet.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Okay, so let's start today with your unusual route into podiatric surgery. You initially completed a Bachelor of Science in Podiatry to qualify as a practitioner podiatrist, but you have since gone on to complete a number of degrees, as I've mentioned already, including 4 doctorates. I can't quite believe it. I had to double check that with you because it didn't feel like it was right, but it is right. It's amazing. What led you to go from one thing to the next, to continue with your kind of ongoing academic journey and all these achievements?
I think mainly curiosity. As I mentioned previously, I started later in life. I went to university at the age of 29 and graduated with my first degree in podiatry 4 years later. And from that, I just found the sort of clinical science behind that extremely interesting. I found the clinical component mixed with the academic component something that I would like to take forward after leaving university.
Fab. Well, this sets us up well for your first photo, which shows you in a black cap and gown, quite unusual. Can you tell us about this?
Yes, certainly. So that is my Doctorate of Science, or as they say in the Eastern Bloc in Romania and Moldova and St. Petersburg. It is a Doctorate in Stenati, which basically means Doctorate in Science. On arriving into Moldova, Nicolae Tesmitsar's University, and that would have been early 2014, 2015, I led the ward rounds to see patients, mainly from a diabetes and peripheral vascular perspective, and the burden that was having on the healthcare system. It's quite apparent quite soon that they had very little literature or data underpinning what they did in their way of interpretation. So I was asked to write a book or write a thesis on clinical biomechanics, and that's what led to the doctorate in Stenata, the doctorate in science. I wrote a book on the way the human lower limb functions from the hip to the knee to the ankle in kinetics and kinematics. I used the data here from Manchester and I translated that data across into the medical school at Nicolae Tesmitsar's University.
Fantastic. So you qualified as a practicing podiatrist and then you moved into a joint clinical academic research post, initially focused on diabetic foot infections and ulcers, and that has remained as one of your main research interests. What is it that kind of got you interested in the diabetic foot infections and ulcers?
Yeah, I think from a diabetes perspective and its sort of associated lower limb complications, it's really one of the most challenging complications of diabetes is an amputation. There are lots of studies available, and the number varies from approximately 10% of the population of diabetes at any one time. And a lifetime risk of an amputation, if you do have diabetes, is about 10%. They have a 30-day mortality after an amputation, and that differs slightly whether it's within the foot, the leg, or through the thigh. But really, it's a devastating complication of diabetes. It's a life-changing complication, as one would imagine, and we have strived over the last 2 decades to reduce those amputation rates. So if we can pick up on the complications sooner, then obviously we can prevent that life-changing event.
What are the challenges with doing this research?
The challenges are really social demographics. There's a big inequality across England itself, whether you look at the demographics of, sort of, say, London to Manchester, to say somewhere like Glasgow. We have a lot of social deprivation here in Manchester, and when you see social deprivation, unfortunately you get the associated communicable diseases with that. And I think that's a big challenge also when you're looking at clinical trials, because obviously, as you know yourself, you've got to marry those clinical trials with what is part of what we deem now the new terminology is real world data.
Absolutely. This links well to our next photo, which has got a little blur on it for anyone who is a bit squeamish, maybe like me, but it shows you operating on a foot. Can you explain the story behind this particular photo?
Yeah, certainly. So that is what we call the Grand Rounds. That's in Romania. That's in one of my parent universities, Victor Bebish University. And these are patients who've come in with really the end complication of diabetes. I think what is sometimes hard to imagine, if your kidney's not working very well, you can't see that that's the case. If your heart's not working very well, you can't physically see that that's the case. But once you turn up to a healthcare provider and you have an hole in your foot or your leg, you then know that you have a problem. Unfortunately, that tends to be the latter stages of the disease process. So what I'm showing there, I'm showing the young residents that this patient has for want of a better word, a hole in his foot or a diabetic foot ulcer. But we've already got the kidney complications. We've already got the eye complications, retinopathy, nephropathy, and neuropathy. So i.e. the patients can't feel that they have an hole in the foot, they can't see they have an hole in the foot, and nor can they smell that they have a foot infection. So it's trying to do a educational program to the patient and the young doctors to let them know that this is the case.
That's really interesting. So, Professor Frank Bowling, let's go back to the start. You were born in Bolton and grew up in the 1970s. What was that like?
Very pleasant. I had quite a nice childhood. My parents being civil servants, working for the government. I would deem it to be, I don't know if this is the correct thing to say, a middle class upbringing. We went on holiday 3 to 4 times a year. We would go camping in France and Italy. We would go on car trips with a caravan as well. My sister would always be sort of in tow. We would be together. And yes, it was very, very pleasant. My school years, I struggled a little due to issues that we will talk about a little later, but mainly in short, back in the sort of mid-80s, whilst being a student or at school, I had a diagnosis of what the new terminology now is neurodivergent. So that did make school, I would say, difficult, but obviously you overcome difficulties. but it certainly made it slightly more challenging to what other students would deem to be challenging.
Yeah.
That said, I truly believe that there's a way around most things, and if there's a will, there's a way.
So with your neurodivergence, I guess what I'm wondering is you've had this incredible career. You've accrued more qualifications than I have ever seen, and been very prolific in a range of ways, both humanitarian but also academic. And I'm wondering, how do you think your neurodivergence has kind of gone along with that? Has it contributed to that? Kind of what's been the relationship between the two?
I think it's been a large contributing factor. If I think back, I'm very focused. I can always do the job in hand. If I have this sort of thing where if I pick a piece of paper up, I will deal with it before I file it. The paper piece of paper doesn't get filed, it gets dealt with, and then it gets put away. Also, I think from where I sit, I can see on a spatial perspective. Normally, if I can see it, I can do it, and that's from a practical level, and that's also from a academic level as well. It's sort of see one, teach one, do one, isn't it? If I can see it, I can teach it, and I can do it. And I think that's that spatial awareness that I have. But other issues that are a downside to that, I have very poor, as you may get from this podcast, I have very poor social skills. I talk with my eyes closed, which sometimes makes it a little difficult because I can't think unless everything goes quiet around me. And I also think that it's some of the traits that go with it as well make it extremely difficult in an interview process or anything else that what people without these issues would deem just to be a normal way of life.
I'm wondering if there might be somebody listening who's maybe thinking about a clinical academic career or doing some of the work that you have done and maybe experiences neurodivergence themselves, but has always thought that that would be a barrier. What message would you want to give them?
The first message is there are no barriers. Barriers are just what you put up in your way. You can always get around barriers, and I can assure you that I've had many, many barriers in my way. I've had many doors closed in front of me because of the issues that I've had over the years, but you will always open that door. There's always a way to open it. It may mean that you have to work twice as hard. I know from my college years that my friends would do something within 10 minutes and it would take me 2 days. It is what it is. You just got to accept that that's the case, and it is going to take longer than your peers or your colleagues. But what you've got to remember, you can bring equal to or more than to the table, because you have a unique way of thinking and you have a unique way of bringing things together. I mean, I'm exceptionally good at bringing, and the only reason I've succeeded to where I am now in life, what I can do is bring the right people to the table who need to be at the table to achieve a successful outcome.
I think this is a good moment for your next photo. So this is a photo of you when you look like you're about maybe 4 or 5 and you're at an airfield. Can you tell us a bit more?
Yeah, certainly. So I'd be around about 4 or 5 years old. I'd gone with my father and my father's best friend, being a pilot. He had a little Cessna, I think it was a 4-seater Cessna. We used to go flying together on good days. So we'd fly from Blackpool up the Fylde coast as far up as sort of Scotland and sort of over to sort of the Isle of Man and sort of loop back round. And obviously, 4 or 5 year old, it was the best thing that could ever happen to anybody at that age. Just seeing the open views and the nice days and the nice times and the nice weather, really going back to having the childhood that allowed that to happen.
I'm wondering, it sounds like your childhood was kind of idyllic in many ways. You know, you said you go on camping holidays to France, you get to go on a little plane. How did all of that shape you, and how did it lead you into the career that you've since had doing, you know, clinical work and humanitarian work and research?
Yeah, I think from a very young age, my parents and my sister knew that I was different in some ways and made things difficult in other ways. And I think the more that they could take me away from that and experience other things rather than me just sitting in the house reading, which is what I do avidly, and I can go through 2 or 3 books in a night. I can speed read a book, so I can literally read let's say it's a novel, for example. In my case, it tended not to be a novel, but let's just say a novel. I could read it in 2 hours, a full novel in 2 hours, literally. I will speed read the book, and I will then go on to another one, and on to another one. And that's part of the sort of neurodivergent trait that I have. And my sister will try to move me away from that on days out to just experience things that are deemed to be slightly more normal. But yeah, we had some fantastic times. I love the outdoors. I love to swim, and I have done for the last 45 years. I would go to swim baths 3 times a week. I'll go to the gym 3 times a week. But unfortunately, about 3 years ago, I had a motorbike accident that sort of put pay to that for a further 3 years, just while I sort of in rehabilitation.
Wow. And in terms of getting into healthcare in particular, did you have any models of that when you were younger? I'm wondering, was there anyone in your family, anyone that you knew that you saw being a healthcare professional and you thought,
no.
oh,
Unfortunately, no, nobody at all. Like I said, my parents are civil servants, so no, from a healthcare perspective, I knew no friends had moved into the healthcare sector. My sort of introduction, I went travelling in my early 20s across Africa, Southeast Asia, and further afield, and a lot of it was linked to my sort of rock climbing. I was an avid rock climber, mountaineer from sort of the Alps to the Himalayas, and sort of whitewater kayaking on the Zambezi and that kind of things as a raft guide. And whilst I was doing that, I saw extreme poverty to a level that you could never, coming from a relatively sheltered background, it was poverty to a level that you couldn't actually acknowledge. You couldn't see that was ever possible. And I think from that then got me into thinking, okay, is there anything I can do here in these humanitarian camps across West Africa? So I worked in the humanitarian camps, I would say 3 to 4 months a year over 10 years, offering any charity that I could offer with a lot of the NGOs, the non-governmental organisations, such as Oxfam, the Red Cross, Salvation Army, and so on. And I took a lot of pleasure out of that. And then really from that, when I returned back to the UK, I'd be 29 at the time, sort of living in Scotland. I lived in the north of Scotland because they have the big sea cliffs that you can climb for rock climbing. And I came back down to Manchester, and then, okay, what would I like to do? After a long think, my first qualification in engineering, yes, as a draftsman, qualified at 21. No, I didn't really want to go back into that. What I wanted to do was, from what I saw, really to spend the rest of my life or dedicate that time that I had available to alleviate the suffering of others. And that's really what got me into healthcare.
What have the challenges been of doing the humanitarian work that it sounds like was your impetus for going into healthcare in the first place?
There's a huge amount of challenges, and I don't want to sound like this from a negative perspective. Financial is a big challenge. From my side, I worked for everything that I've done. I would work evenings in bars. I would work pretty much anywhere. I'd work as a ski guide in France or wherever it may be, a rock climbing guide. I would just accrue enough money so I could go to the places that I wanted to go to offer the services that I could offer from what at that time was a very limited healthcare. It was more sort of like paramedical patients comfortable, and just really, really doing what you could. The challenges are vast, and I think as time's gone on, the challenges have got more difficult. It's not just now a financial challenge, it's also a challenge of, we know with the issues within Europe and further afield, lots of issues are arising with a shorter duration. So sort of back in the early 90s and early 2000s, a lot of these issues were once every 2, every 3 years. But now it's becoming, well, the issues are appearing once every 18 months, like the issue we've got at present in Africa and so on. So I think the challenges should never stop anybody from following a dream, because if you dream big enough, then you'll succeed and you'll overcome the challenges. All challenges can be overcome. That is just a challenge. Some of them are slightly more arduous than others, but that said, I've hit challenges, small challenges, and I think it's got to be down to the person. Is that person driven enough, and does that person want it enough? Because the challenges from sort of the neurodivergent perspective, I'd say they're bigger challenges, because they're challenges that you've got to deal with at a personal level. The other challenge is you think to yourself, well, if I do this and that and this, then I can get it sorted out. But I think the personal challenges are the most difficult.
How do you manage the emotional stress that inevitably goes along with doing kind of emergency medical humanitarian work?
I see an healthcare professional. I think that's really the only way I can answer that. It is difficult, and it is extremely distressing. Absolutely. Let's say, for example, last night I slept for about 3 hours, because your brain's working overtime to things that you've seen, to things that you maybe could have done more about. Did I do enough at that one time to out with that person? And yeah, it's a torment. Sometimes you find it a torment. But I've been very sort of privileged also. I've worked in a lot of these places, and one in particular, I treated one young chap. We won't go into the age or why, but I later saw this same chap 10 years later, who'd walked for 2 days just to come to the clinic, just to give him some sweets. And when you speak to this young chap with his sister, he'd not actually eaten himself for 2 days just so he could give you the sweets. So there's things, small things, there's nuances that make everything, all this sort of misery that you have in front of you, put it into perspective. You are making a difference, and you are helping. And I've also been very, very privileged in the aspect, I currently work a lot in Romania. I do a lot of work in Romania, from teaching to surgery in Moldova, because obviously it's on the borders of where the current conflicts are. And it's fair to say that I can take from them as much as they can take from me. The big university I work with and allied to is Victor Babiš University in Timișoara. One example would be, we have lots of burns patients that we see, and not being a plastic surgeon by training, I wanted to offer these patients a plastics, what we deem to be a plastics procedure. The university is very adept at that, so then I can take that away with me from what they've actually taught me, not from what I've taught them.
I think this is a good point to look at your next photo, which I believe shows Mongolia. Can you tell us about this?
I was just qualifying as a podiatrist, as you mentioned from the very beginning, and we'd gone on a ski expedition with some friends from one of the big ski companies at the time to see if it was feasible to do cross-country skiing in and around Mongolia, and what trips would be viable, really, for want of a better word. But on arriving in Mongolia, flew into Ulaanbaatar, which is I'm sure people know, back in the early 2000s, was mainly a tent city. It was the round tents, the gis that made up 95% of housing situation, and it's under the old Soviet system, where a lot of the central heating systems to any of the apartments that were still remaining was fed in via the heating system, so then it could be controlled externally, the heating system to the apartments. So just walking along, you've got what we would deem to be a manhole, and all these manhole covers would be lifted. You'd look down and there'd be a drop of about 20 foot. It's a huge drop. If you fell down one, for sure you'd break something. So I remember saying, okay, why? What's happening here? What's the situation? And they have a lot of orphans, unfortunately, because a lot of the diseases that we simply don't see anymore are still quite rife or active in these countries. So thus leaving a lot of orphans. And I went to see one of these charitable organisations, these NGOs that were actually dealing with the orphans that lived down the manhole at the side of the central heating system, because obviously the outside temperatures in winter dropped to -40. So it was absolutely, so little children would go, climb to the manholes, and they would sleep outside the central heating pipes. Unfortunately, because the extremities got so cold, they pop them onto the central heating pipes, and then they come out with 3rd-degree burns on their hands and the feet. So the charities will take those children and they will take them to the temporary hospitals or whatever facilities that they had. And from that, then sort of being at that time sort of paramedical, we could then look at them and mainly soothing lotions and so on, just to remove the amount of pain that came from the burns of the little children sleeping outside of the central heating pipes in -40 degrees.
Wow, that sounds like it must have been such an impactful trip.
Yeah, that was one of the most traumatic, really. I've been to other places but I think when it's children at that age, and we're talking anywhere from, as orphans, anywhere from 3 to 6, just as a snapshot of these patients, then yeah, it's not the most pleasant situation, but certainly if we can then, or from what I took away, if I can then help those little children to take away the suffering or to take away the pain from the burns, then it's got to be worth it, hasn't it? It's got to be worth it. It can't not be worth it. And then on return back to the UK, okay, what can I do now to help them even more? I can do plastics. Okay, I'll do plastics. It's another qualification, but if that other qualification helps the suffering of somebody else, then it doesn't matter if I'm sat there till 2 o'clock in the morning doing whatever on my computer, because I know that the end result will help that small child or that person and alleviate that suffering.
That's amazing. You've had such a varied career and you've done so many different things, and you've been awarded an MBE, so you've got that kind of wide recognition of your achievements as well. But I want to put it to you, from your perspective, can you think of a career highlight that for you, I suppose, demonstrates, why you do what you do?
I know that I've mentioned about helping patients and alleviating suffering and pain, which is always going to be my primary focus. But I also spend a lot of time, as you mentioned, writing papers, working on books and book chapters, which I get a lot of pleasure from. And a friend and colleague of mine from the US, just talking in general, so I'm getting tired now, I'm a lot into this, and I'm sort of get very little downtime from it. I think what he said, if that one paper makes a difference, that one clinician, with regards to how he's going to treat that patient, then that paper's got to be worth writing.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's time for your last photo, which shows 3 people in green caps and gowns looking like they're operating. Can you tell us the story behind this photo?
So that is me operating in Romania, and what I'm doing there is what they call practice simulation, and this is at the Victor Babis University, where they run the courses in plastic surgery. So this is a live simulation, and you can see from the picture in the background of Practising, the best procedures and the best techniques to help the patients that need the surgery.
I'm wondering now, the kind of humanitarian work that you have done, you've done it with different charities rather than kind of doing it with one organisation. What advice would you give if there's a healthcare worker listening to this who thinks, I would really love to be able to go and do the kind of work that Frank does, to help people in other countries? What could be the first steps for somebody in that direction?
So there are agents, there's Medicine Sans Frontières. I don't want to talk about too much about different sort of NGOs because there are many and you are needed in many of those. So being selective about one of them simply would throw bias. So I would say go across to just Google NGOs and you'll see a big list, Oxfam and various ones that will come available to you, and just pick which one that suits you the best from that's going to keep you out of harm's way. I think that's at this moment in time, in the society that we live in, me telling you to give you, if you went away and you went to somewhere that put you in harm's way, I would feel personally responsible for that. So I think what I'm trying to say is that's got to be that's got to be your decision. But me looking back over 25 years, just go somewhere that's going to keep you out of harm's way, but is going to offer a humanitarian approach to the patients to alleviate the suffering.
Well, I think that brings us to the end of our interview today. Frank Bowling, thank you so much for speaking with us. To our listeners, thank you so much for choosing to join us for Humans of Clinical Academia. This is a Manchester Catalys podcast. Manchester Catalys is a partnership between the University of Manchester and Manchester University NHS Foundation Trust, and we are grateful for their support, which has made this recording possible. I'd also like to thank my Manchester Catalys colleagues and especially Umang Sinha for production and editing.